Hey gardeners, Lindsay here with the Mindful Living Movement, and as you can see I've got a whole bunch of pots behind me ready to go for planting. I thought I would talk about what I put in my pots because this particular little spot right here, it's really sunny as you can see. It is almost full sun for the majority of the day, and it's hot. The concrete radiates quite a bit of heat and this fence radiates quite a bit of heat. And so this little microclimate here is actually really fantastic for a lot of those heat-loving plants that some other spaces in my garden just get a little bit too much shade for, so I really like to take advantage. However, when you're growing in pots, particularly in a really hot spot, a lot of those heat-loving plants, they're also really thirsty and they're also really hungry. So you need to make sure that what you're putting in your pots is going to be able to meet those needs, especially if you're not super diligent on your watering like me. I'm kind of on the other end of the scale. I tend to underwater. And a lot of the things that I plan on sticking in here, they just don't allow that. They're not going to be happy if I do that. So first things first, why would you make your own potting soil? So as I mentioned, I have very specific requirements of what I need this space to do, and I need a soil that's going to hold a lot of moisture. But some of the other reasons you might want to make your own soil is just simply that a lot of the cheaper potting soil mixes, they don't tend to come with a lot of very robust nutrients or moisture holding capabilities. It's questionable as to what's actually really in them. Sometimes they don't even list the ingredients. And if you're going to be paying for the other end, the top quality, pro mix type things, probably you're going to be getting a really good soil, but you're going to be paying a lot of money. So depending on how many things you're filling, that might also not be feasible. So at least for myself, one, I want to save money, but two, I want to use materials that I already have, and three, I want to make sure that I have a ton of moisture holding capabilities in these. So that's the reasoning that I have chosen to make my own potting soil. I know what's in it. I know how to adapt and create it for, in this case, I'm going to be putting a lot of different squash type plants. So they're very hungry, they're very thirsty, and I don't want them getting dried out because that's just going to stress out the situation. So making your own custom potting soil mix is also a really good practice to get into so that you can maybe reuse your potting soil mix from season to season. Again, saving money. There's no reason why you can't reuse. If you didn't end up with bugs or you didn't have any weird sort of disease type things possibly happen, you should be reusing your soil, but it's going to need a refresh. So mixing up a custom batch is definitely the way to go. Now, I have kind of a variety of things that I put in my mixes depending on what I have access to each season. I do start with a cheap potting soil mix. I usually try and stock up at the very end of the last season when they're less than half the price. I'll try and fill up a whole corner of my shed with those kinds of potting soil mixes. One, because I make my own custom mix for outside, but I also make my own custom mix for all the plants that I seed start inside. So stocking up in the off season, first things first, that's always a good tip. Also, I make all my own compost. So I have 4 big compost bins outside and I have 2 vermicompost bins inside. So that is something that I'm already making. I already have. I'm not spending any more money to buy those things. So I'm using those materials incorporated into it. And then I have access to a lot of composted tree mulch for free. So I try to take advantage of that because that's just such great biomass to be able to add and get a lot of that really great humus. And when it's already going through that composting process, you probably will be digging up a lot of earthworms and things from the piles anyways. And what I have found by incorporating a lot of that composted tree mulch into my pots, I tend to end up with a lot of earthworms in my pots. So because I've got a lot of really chunky organic matter in here, the worms they love life. They'll just continue working their way through and eating all that good stuff and continuing to release their castings so that my very hungry plants are even happier. So it just kind of win-win. So, I'm getting composted tree mulch for free. I'm not paying for that. My compost, my vermicompost, is providing me lots of nutrients, more humusy materials, more moisture retention, really good aeration. I'm buying potting soil on sale. Off season is a really big thing. And then I do tend to add in either perlite or vermiculite to help out just with a little bit more of aeration in the soil. I just kind of go with whatever I happen to have. Again, if I find it on sale in the off season, that's usually the one that I'm going to buy. I do tend to lean a little bit more towards vermiculite versus perlite, but again, you get to choose kind of what's going to work for you. And you don't have to be super specific with your ratio. Like there's no, it has to be this many grams versus this, or 1 part this, 10 parts that, anything. You can have a little bit of leeway in it. I can tell you that with these particular buckets behind me here, when I mixed them up, I probably had maybe about 1/3 to 1/2 of the potting soil mix, and then the other half would have been a combination of compost and tree mulch. So I would say that I maybe use, we'll say 1/4 compost, 1/4 to 1/3 tree mulch, the rest being potting soil, and then I'll add in just like, you know, a few extra scoops here and there of perlite or vermiculite, or maybe some worm castings. I'll throw a little bit of extra in there if I'm short on compost, but I have lots of worm castings. I sort of fluctuate based on what my materials are, but I rarely ever cross about halfway for potting soil. At least probably half I'm adding in composted tree mulch, or straight up compost, or worm castings, or something of that nature, because I want lots of nutrients, lots of biomass, lots of humusy materials. I want to bring in lots of good bacteria, and I want to bring in the worms as well if I can, which usually happens when you're bringing in lots of compost from your bins, or you always catch the odd one you bring in from your vermicompost, or, you know, just like the tree mulch compost piles, as I mentioned. And they're absolutely beautiful. At the end of the season, when I dump them out, I always just dump them into my garden to kind of top up my garden beds around, and it's amazing. They go from being like a really chunky soil at the beginning of the season with all those earthworms and microbes working away all summer long. It comes out with this insanely beautiful black gold. So it's sort of like I'm composting and I'm growing in it at the same time over my season, which is pretty cool. So I highly recommend. I will link to my blog post where I break down a little bit more in detail the materials I use, the proportions I use, and as I said, there's no exact recipe, but I'll give you a general guideline for helping you to kind of start to get to figure out what works the best for you. And as you get to know your microclimates and where you grow, if you're growing in really hot, sunny places, I do recommend lots of tree mulch, lots of compost, just so you have something that really hold onto moisture. You've got a really good quality soil as well. And if you would like to know more tips on my pre-season prep, I will put a link here and a link in the description with my 9 essential spring garden prep tips, so that you can work through in order, super easy, get that garden up and running and ready to go. And this is things you can do before frost, but also things that can kind of slowly continue even after your frost. My pots I tend to plant out last. I usually try to get the seeds in the garden, the transplants, and the rest of the garden first, because I know that this place is so hot and sunny that as soon as I put anything in there, they're just off to the races right away. A lot of times as well, the heat-loving plants, it's usually better if you kind of push them towards a little bit later, rather than the cool days and cool nights. You know, get the more tolerant plants out of the way. So if that helped, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe if you want to keep getting more videos just like this one. We will see you again soon, gardeners. Have a beautiful day.